This is the story of the well at the world's end. Let us be off. Away we go. There was once a king. A wise king he was, kind and beloved by all his people. Now this king fell ill one day and took to his bed. No doctor could heal him. Finally, a wise old hermit who lived nearby foretold that the only thing that could heal the king's sickness was a drink of water from the well at the world's end. The king had 3 sons. The oldest prince decided that he would set out to find this water and cure his father. So first, he went to the hermit's house to find out how he might get to this strange place. "I have heard tell," said the hermit, "that the place you seek is beyond 7 oceans, 7 rivers, 7 lakes, 7 fields, 7 hills, and 7 mountains. There stands the castle at the end of the world, and there you'll find the well with the water." The prince wasted no time. He set out immediately. Far and far and farther still he went, crossing 7 oceans, 7 rivers, 7 lakes, 7 fields, 7 hills, and 7 mountains. Now on his way, by the side of the road one day, he passed an old woman who said, "Oh, tell me, young man, can you spare a bit of food and drink? For I'm powerfully hungry and thirsty." "Be gone with you, old beggar woman," said the prince. "I have little enough for myself." As you will," said the old woman. "But I know where you're going, and I know you want the world's end water to heal your sick father." "You know of the place?" asked the prince. "I do indeed," she said, "and I'll give you some advice. Never blow your horn till you've drawn your sword, and never give in to temptation." "Well, I hardly know what that means," said the prince. "I'll be on my way. Thanks for nothing." On the prince went until he came to the end of the world, and there stood a castle made all of brass. Now, hanging by the castle door was a large horn. The prince took down the horn and gave a sharp blast. The castle doors opened, and out rushed 2 hungry lions. The lions set upon the prince and began to tear at him with their claws and bite at him with their sharp teeth. The prince did not even have time to draw his sword to defend himself. He would have been killed if the lions had not stopped. "You are a cad," said one. "Yes," said the other, "but you're on a good errand, so we will let you escape with your life." "Thank you, oh thank you," said the prince. He went inside the castle, and he found himself in a dimly lit hall. There were many soldiers standing there in armor, all holding spears. They did not move, for they were asleep where they stood. They were in 2 long rows, and the prince walked between them. On and on he went. His footsteps echoed in the silence. In the next room, there, on a large throne, sat a princess. She was very beautiful, and the prince sat down before her and began to talk to her sweetly and kindly. But the princess warned him, "Do not stay. There isn't much time, prince. You must go and collect the world's end water from the well in the garden. Know you this, if you aren't out of the castle before the clock strikes 12, why then you'll meet your doom." This spurred the prince onward. He got up and went into the next chamber. There was a table, decked out with plates of the finest food he had ever seen. Well, he was quite hungry. He set upon the food and began to eat as though he had never eaten before. He devoured plate after plate of food and drank wine from the goblets that were there. Well, only a few minutes remained before the clock would strike 12. He went out into the garden. There was the well at the world's end. Next to the well was a little crystal bottle. The well was under a tree, which made beautiful shade, and as the prince was so weary from his journey, he could not resist sitting down in the shade and closing his eyes. Just for a few minutes, he told himself. But then he heard the clock beginning to strike 12. Oh, murder! He leapt up and grabbed the crystal flask. He reached down into the well to fill it with the world's end water. The clock had struck 6 by the time he was done. He corked the flask and began to run out, through the room with the food, and through the room with the princess, and down the hall. But the clock was striking 10, 11, 12. And as the clock struck its last note, the soldiers banged their spears upon the floor and circled round him. They seized him and threw him into the deepest dungeon of the castle, and there he lay. Well, after many months had gone by with no word from the oldest prince, the second son set out to heal his father. He consulted the hermit, and he too was told of the 7 oceans, the 7 rivers, the 7 lakes, the 7 fields, the 7 hills, and the 7 mountains. And he too made the journey. On and on and on he went. Now by the side of the road he came across the old woman, who said, "Good day, fine prince. Do you have any food and drink to spare for a poor old one like me?" "Begone with you, filthy old hag," he said. "I cannot stop at once, for I'm on an important errand." As you say, she said. "But I know that you mean to go to the castle at the world's end and retrieve the world's end water from the well there to heal your sick father." "You know of my quest?" asked the prince. "Yes, indeed," she said, "and I'll give you advice. Never blow your horn till you've drawn your sword, and never give in to temptation." "Very well, then," he said, "but I don't know what you mean by that. Now I'll be on my way." And having said so, he went on. Now he too came to the end of the world. He too arrived at the castle made all of brass, and he too reached up and took down the horn and gave a blow. Well, the castle doors opened and out rushed the lions, and they treated him as roughly as they had treated his older brother. Then they stopped. "You are a vile cur," said one lion. "Yes," said the other lion, "but your aim is true, and so we will allow you inside." The prince thanked them and stumbled in. He walked between the 2 rows of soldiers who stood sleeping and holding their spears. He too made pretty words to the princess, but she warned him to be on his way and to be out of the castle before the clock struck 12. He too went into the next room, and he too ate of the food and drank of the water and the wine that was on the table. He too went into the garden and lay down to catch a little bit of rest in the fine shade of the trees. Now the clock began to strike 12. Oh dear, the prince jumped up and filled the little crystal flask with the world's end water. He corked it again and began to run, but he made it no farther than his brother had when the clock sounded its last note. The soldiers banged their spears upon the floor and seized him and threw him into the dungeons beside his brother. Now there was only one prince left, and after months, with no word from his two older brothers, he set out. He consulted the hermit, and the hermit told him to cross 7 oceans, 7 rivers, 7 lakes, 7 fields, 7 hills, and 7 mountains. Well, he was on his way, the youngest prince. But when he came across the old woman, he spoke with her kindly. "Good day, old grandmother," he said. "Have some of my food, and have some of my drink." Well, he shared with her, and when the two of them were satisfied, she smiled at him. "Now you are on your way to the castle at the world's end, just as your older brothers were." He nodded. "Well, I'll give you advice. Never blow your horn till you've drawn your sword, and never give in to temptation. I'll also give you a gift which they did not have." And having said so, the old woman reached into her pockets and took out 2 sweet cakes. "Here you are," she said. "Use these to save your life." Now, the prince did not know what she meant, but he thanked her, and on he walked. Well, after quite some time, he came to the castle at the end of the world. He reached up and took down the horn, but before he blew on it, he remembered what the old woman had told him, and he drew his sword. Now, he blew on the horn, the doors opened, and the lions rushed out, but when they saw him holding his sword, they stopped and drew back. They stood still. The prince feared for his life, but he remembered the 2 sweet cakes, so he pulled them out and tossed them to the lions. They had 1 each. They picked up the sweet cakes in their mouths and began to chew. The cakes were so delicious that the lions forgot all about the prince, and he went inside. Down the hall he walked. When he came to the room with the wonderful princess, he knelt down before her and bowed his head. She smiled sweetly at him and said, "You have no time to lose. Go out through the room with the food and into the garden. Fill the crystal flask with water from the well, and then be on your way." Well, the prince listened to every word. He passed by the table with the food and drink, and though it tempted him, he did not stop to take any. He went out into the garden. There was the tree with its beautiful shade, but he did not lie down. Instead, he picked up the crystal flask and filled it with world's end water. Then he went back the way he had come. Out of the castle he went. He took the horn with him, and when he'd gotten well clear of the castle grounds, he blew on the horn 1 more time. The sound came out like thunder, and the castle began to shake and crumble. It fell with a resounding crash. When the prince looked, all the rubble and all the waste was gone. It was as if no castle had ever been standing there. But there, on her fine throne, was the princess, unharmed, and there, lying in a furrow, were his 2 brothers. Now, the 4 of them laughed and rejoiced, and they set off at once to go back to the castle where the king lay sick. A long journey it was, and an arduous one at that. Now, though the oldest prince and the middle prince smiled and had pretty words for their brother, inwardly they envied him, for they hated to see him succeed where they had failed. And so they concocted a terrible plan. Before they had gotten back to the city where they were born, they tied up the youngest brother and left him in the wood to die of starvation. Now, they pulled the princess roughly along with them, and as they walked, they said, "You had better tell our father that we were the ones who got the world's end water for him, if you value your life." The princess, for her part, said nothing. Well, when they got back to the castle, they walked into their father's chamber at once. There he lay, on his sickbed, surrounded by courtiers. "Is that you, my sons?" he said. "It's I, father," said the oldest prince. "It's I, father," said the middle prince. "But where is your brother?" he asked. "He did not return with us," they said. "But see, we've brought you water from the well at the world's end." "Quickly," called the oldest prince, "bring me a golden cup." The golden cup was brought, and he poured the water into it, and he held the cup out to his father. The king took the golden cup, and he sipped the water, but once he had swallowed it, he felt even worse. He lay there and moaned and groaned in pain. "Why, you didn't do it right," said the middle prince. "Give it to me." He tossed out the water and refilled the golden cup from the crystal flask. He held the golden cup out to his father. His father took it and drank, but oh, he felt even worse. He lay there and thought he was going to die. "What do we do?" asked the princes. They turned to the princess. "Quickly, you must take a turn. Give the water to our father." But the princess said nothing, and she did nothing. No one knew what to do. But just then, in walked the old beggar woman from the side of the road. She had with her a beggar boy who was dirty and clothed in rags. "Good king," she said, "will you have my son give you a drink of water?" "Very well," said the king, who felt as if his strength was about to leave him. Now, the son took a little wooden cup from the king's bedside table. He poured the world's end water into it, and he handed the cup to the king. The king drank from the cup, and as soon as he'd swallowed the water, all his aches and pains melted away, and he was as strong and healthy as he had ever been. He blinked and took a breath and sighed with happiness. "Who are you?" he said. "To whom do I owe a great debt of thanks?" And as soon as he had asked this question, the dirt and rags fell away from the beggar boy, and the king found himself looking at his youngest son. With a glad cry, he seized the youngest prince around the neck and hugged him and kissed him. The rags fell away from the old beggar woman as well, and she stood up, a fine and proud lady, and told the king everything that had transpired. Now, when he heard the story, he fixed a powerful anger on his oldest son and his middle son, and the two of them ran from the castle and never dared show their face in the kingdom again. The prince and the princess, for their part, were married without delay. Glad was the prince that he had made the long journey and returned safely from the well at the world's end.